Hello and welcome. My name's Ben Judah. I'm an Initiative Director and a Senior Fellow here at the Atlantic Council's Europe Programme in Washington, DC. And I'm delighted to be joined here today by Dr. Cecilia Malmström. Dr. Cecilia Malmström is a non-resident Senior Fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, and she hosts their virtual event series Trade Winds, which I recommend everybody check out. Dr. Malmström has also led an accomplished career working in Brussels as a former European Commissioner for Trade, former European Commissioner for Home Affairs, and a former member of the European Parliament. And in her home country of Sweden, she's also served as a former Minister for EU Affairs. Dr. Malmström, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
I'm really excited to have a chance to speak to you today because Sweden is taking over the presidency of the EU. And this is at a moment when a lot of your themes really feel at the front of European and international politics. The geopolitics of trade, the evolution of the Commission, how do Europe's more kind of free trading nations by tradition, such as Sweden, navigate the turn to industrial policy, and how do we get that right? So I'd love to begin by asking you really quite a simple question. What does it mean for a country to take over the EU presidency in this day and age? Like, what, in terms of like practical power and influence over the agenda, how powerful is it? How influential is it?
Well, it's actually less influential today than like 10 years ago, the last time Swedish had the presidency in 2009, because now there is a share of the European Council where the ministers, the prime ministers meet. They have a permanent president, so the rotating prime ministers do not lead in the same way as they did before. But it's still an opportunity to steer the European Union, and especially in these very important days. So the ministers, they share all the councils where there are ministers involved. They lead the negotiations with the European Parliament, and there are about 1,000 different committees and smaller meetings also dedicated to move things forward in the European Union. So these are busy days as well. But of course, you have to be an honest broker as well. So it's not the moment to promote, a full Swedish agenda. It's a moment where you try to make compromises, to push forward, to do some work behind the scenes in order to find where is the common denominator and so on. So it's an important time, but really hard work.
So what are the priorities that Sweden is bringing to this role?
Well, the Prime Minister said just before Christmas that the number 1, 2, and 3 priorities: Ukraine, Ukraine, and Ukraine. To assist Ukraine, to make sure to coordinate the help, the assistance, both military, economically, humanitarian, and also try to steer the enlargement process where Ukraine has applied for EU membership. But apart from this, it's competitiveness, the green agenda, and also security and democracy. So lots of things that are on the table, proposals, but also challenges in the European Union. And then you always have to plan for things that just suddenly pop up. You mentioned it. I mean, we had the IRA from the US popping up, landing nicely on the table of the Swedish presidency, and then any other thing that could occur, of course.
Well, let's kind of drill down that theme of competitiveness then. Sweden's traditionally one of the more free trading countries in spirit in the European Union. The response to the IRA, which I still can't call the IRA, is...
No, as a Brit, that must be difficult. They should have chosen another acronym, actually.
is pushing Europe towards a form of industrial policy. What's your view on the possibilities and the dangers of that approach? What is the European Union trying to negotiate internally in order to get a good response?
Well, trying to respond to that, but it doesn't come from a vacuum because, of course, after the COVID, there was a very big recovery fund set up among member states with 750 billion euros, which is, the double of our IRA. And the focus was, of course, recovery after the pandemic, but focus on digital and green investments. So it was already there. And it was, we have been in the process of distributing that money, loans and grants, to the different member states, but also every member state had to come in with a sort of plan on so that the money didn't go into black holes, but targeted on green investment. And there's money left there, so you can use that as well. So the balance, the equilibrium to make is, of course, to navigate between doing the same thing, opening all the doors for full subsidies in the member states, and also keeping a level playing field in the internal market. And that's a tricky thing, because some member countries, the big ones, France, Germany, they could subsidize their industries with quite a lot of money, but the smaller ones, they don't have that capacity. And as we have a common market, if you allow for that, it would totally disturb the functioning of that, and that can create a lot of problems. And traditionally, the European Union have had quite rigid rules on how to allow state aid, because we don't believe that is the way forward unless it is very targeted and limited. And of course, Sweden is more on the scale of those who are skeptical to big subsidies, and then other countries are maybe more on the other side. So it's a tricky balance to have there. And the Commission has been working really hard to find a proposal that could fit anybody, or everybody would at least be able to live with. So there hasn't been any formal decisions yet, but a proposal to be a little bit more flexible in how you apply the state rules, but also speed up the processes. Because in the US, I think it's quite quick, but in Europe, it can take a year to get a response whether it's allowed or not. So to speed up that considerably, and also use money that is hanging around in the system, for instance in the recovery fund, to use for more green investment, because we don't want to have a subsidy race with the US or any others, and we don't want to boost the rhetoric in a way. I mean, EU and US are friends and allies. We have disagreements, but the most important thing now is to work side by side to support Ukraine as well. So we don't want that to be at risk. So it's a tricky path forward.
So kind of looking at the IRA, we see that there are a lot of, the US is sort of betting on everything. It's giving money to the full gamut of green technology, from EVs to carbon capture technologies via wind. I've had a lot of talk that Europe needs to focus, and Europe needs to work out what are the right bets to make, because Europe doesn't have the resources to match everything America's doing. Do you agree with that argument? Is that something that the Swedish presidency will be discussing? And if so, what do you think Europe's advantages are?
First of all, I think it is great that the US is investing broad and big money in green technology and energy transition. This is something that the world needs. The US is a big, carbon polluter and needs to invest. And in the past, there has been, even leaving the Paris Agreement was something we were very concerned about. So overall, this is to be welcomed. Then it has some clear discriminatory elements. Probably some elements are against WTO rules. WTO is not really functioning at the moment, so it's not a tool, at least on a short-term basis, to use. But there are discriminatory elements, and other countries have been complaining as well, Japan, South Korea, and others. But having said that, it is good that there is broad investment in green technology, and Europe needs to do the same. And in the best of worlds, we would have, a competition of green investments, which is good for the world, even if it creates some tension between us. Europe has also been investing in batteries, in hydro. So these are things. And then one of the big things is, of course, energy that has been speeded up because of the need to become less dependent on Russian oil and gas. So that has accelerated the transition, which is one good thing with this terrible war. And then we will have to look at other dependencies, namely rare earth metals. And there has been also discussions on whether to create some sort of global alliance among friends to reduce our dependence of this from China, and to make joint investments. For instance, in the country I come from, Sweden, up north, there has been a discovery of lots of tons of these rare earth metals, but they are deep down in the earth, so you need lots of investment to get them out, apart from all the permits and licenses and regulations and so on. So yes, Europe should be focusing on this, but it's not the role of the Swedish presidency of the Commission to say where companies should invest either. I mean, we believe that this is a market-led decision, and it should be.
Well, so a question I wanted to ask you about is the evolution of the Commission. It was very popular as you know, like a few years ago, to talk about the decline of the Commission and the rise of the Council. But one of the trends that I've noticed under the von der Leyen Commission is sudden demands on the Commission to do more, whether it's vaccine and health, whether it's energy, and now whether it's industrial policy. Do you think that there's been a shift in power towards the Commission? Is a new form of Commission developing? Is this durable? What's your view of the balance of forces in the Europa Quarter in Brussels?
No, certainly, you're right. I was in the Commission for 10 years. And of course, the Commission is at the center of this because the Commission has monopoly in making proposals. So that is a very important role. And then making sure that, they are followed once they are into laws, and also to protect the interest of Europe. But after the pandemic, especially initially, there were total chaos in Europe as elsewhere as well. Nobody really knew what to do. What was this kind of animal? Borders were closed. Within the internal market, it was like European integration of 70 years suddenly stopped. So at some point of that chaos, the Commission took charge. And I think Mrs. von der Leyen did a very good job there, showing that, okay, we can't go on like this. We need to make sure that we inform each other, that we help, and that we assist. And then later, she also led the efforts to purchase the vaccines. And now there is also demand for the Commission to make some proposals when it comes to competition and it comes to green investment. And also the Commission has been leading in making the proposals on the sanctions vis-à-vis Russia. So the Commission has certainly grown in its role. Some are a bit grumpy about this, but it's also because of a lack of European leadership in other countries. So the Commission found a space and took it. And maybe political scientists afterward will look, did the Commission actually expand a bit further than what is allowed according to the treaties? Yes, maybe, especially in the health area. But at least someone took charge, and I think Ursula von der Leyen, her team, should be commended for that. But there will be discussions, and of course we are running up to next year. There's an election in the European Parliament. After that, there will be a new Commission. So of course all this will come up to discussion as well. But at least they deliver results, and then it's up to the member states to make the decisions.
That's fascinating to hear. I wanted to kind of cast our eye towards the future, not just the immediate future of the next few years, but looking ahead over the next 10 years and all the big geopolitical challenges that Europe is going to have to navigate through trade. And there's really kind of three dimensions to that. You work very hard on TTIP and on trying to find a way to get kind of greater free trade with the United States. Do you think some form of green TTIP between Europe and the global democracies in the United States is on the cards?
Well, had we had TTIP now, we had less problems actually with access to the IRA and so on. But no, I don't think it is in the cards. I mean, the Biden administration have been very clear in saying that we do not want to make trade agreements. We want to focus on American workers. We want to focus on cooperation, but not trade in the terms of market access and facilitating. So I don't think that is in the cards, unfortunately. But of course, we could boost. There is this Trade and Tech Council that was created 1.5 years ago with lots of working groups that look at supply chains, semiconductors, green technology, China. I mean, there's a lot of things you look at there. And I think it has under-delivered. It could do much more to look at common standards, for instance, which is very important in trade. And if you either accept each other's standards or do some mutual agreement or harmonize or agree on new standards, especially in the green sector, they're not really agreement on what is a green standard, actually. So we could do much more there to facilitate trade between us. But that requires a lot of political will. And so far, haven't really seen that.
So kind of second dimension I wanted to kind of sketch out with you is, there's a lot of talk about the IRA and how that's bad for European businesses, but there seems to be less talk about the incredible subsidy distortion that takes place in China and the real threat that China's posing to European industry, in particular the automotive industry. I was really shocked to see these statistics of China's takeoff as a global EV exporter, which it never was in terms of the kind of combustion engine supply chain. Are you worried about Europe's place in the global factory on the midterm, about Europe's place in these supply and value chains of the future? And how should Europe be responding to China?
Well, I am a bit worried because if you look at future growth, all the estimations, they're a little bit unclear now because of the war and inflation, but most estimations say that 80% of global growth will come from outside Europe in the future. And that is, that's not enough. So Europe needs to work on its own compatibility. And that is everything from reforming and boosting the internal market to doing more trade deals and addressing these issues. And the EU is right now working on a sort of China strategy. This is complicated because you need the agreement of 27 countries, and there are lots of differences on how you see China. But Europe has, if you look, a few years back, we have become tougher on China. There are lots of trade defense instruments on investment screening, on foreign subsidies, which is directly targeted towards China, anti-coercion, forced labor, due diligence, investment procurement instrument. So it has become tougher vis-a-vis China. And with the US, we have had a dialogue for many years on how to work towards a subsidy scheme that would address what China is doing. The problem is that we did that, EU, US, and Japan, and we thought that we would bring that to the WTO. But of course, if EU and US and also Japan for that side also are massively investing, the credibility of us is becoming a little bit, into question. So that is making things complicated because there are rules on subsidies internationally, but they're very weak and they're very old and they would need to be updated multilaterally. And that's where we could really do something to try to define what is a good subsidy and what is a bad subsidy. And here, of course, joint efforts, EU, US and other allies vis-a-vis China would be very welcome, I think.
So you mentioned kind of more trade deals. Well, one of the most kind of obvious dimensions where Europe could increase its trade is actually with Britain. Do you think that with what looks in all certainty to be a new Labour government coming into power in the UK within the next 18 months, and with the renegotiation of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the TCA, that is the sort of master document between both sides, there's room for a relaxation of trading barriers and trading rules to boost growth on both sides?
Well, that depends entirely on London. I mean, the agreement that we have now, and that actually the government is violating because of the Northern Ireland Protocol that they want to renegotiate. The EU proposed several areas where we could, be increasing trade, but this is what the government chose, and this is what's on the agenda now. And I know that talks are going on to find a solution and some sort of compromise on the Northern Ireland Protocol, which would be good because we have so much in common. We are friends, we are neighbors, we are allies, and it's in our joint interests to facilitate trade as much as possible. But that ball is in London's court right now, independently on what governance there is. And should there be a new government or should there be a change in the current government that they want to move further? I think Brussels is absolutely willing to discuss this because, looking at the statistics, UK has been hit by this. And of course, trade with Europe has gone down quite considerably.
So kind of final question, which is, like you've mentioned several times during this conversation about the decline of the WTO. If we are going to live in a post-WTO world in the long run, what's that look like?
Well, it will be the rule of the jungle. that is a very bad world, because that would be big countries violating all the rules that exist and those who are not existing yet. And then countries like, smaller countries in the West, like my country, Sweden, very trade dependent, we would lose, but especially the developing world will lose. Africa, Latin America, parts of Asia, who are dependent on global rules and predictability and global markets that function according to certain scheme. So we cannot give up on WTO. We have to continue try to reform it and install it and strengthen it. It is not perfect, absolutely not, but it's what we have. And we do need international rules on trade. But it's of course very worrying that when both China and the US are totally, disregarding the rules there, and we need both of them to try to make WTO stronger and working. It works. It is there. It works, but it doesn't work as it should, and it is not up to date with modern trade.
Dr. Cecilia Malmström, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you.